All right. Well, hey, I want to welcome everybody to the IHemp Hour. This is for May the 21st, 2020. And we got a great show lined up today. We've got Michael Thue from Great Lakes Hemp Supplements going to help us out a little bit and learn us how to do some propagating, do some cloning. We're looking forward to that. Mike's got some good things to talk about as far as what's coming on with the opening as we gradually get the state back up and running. I've got some great recipe to share with you and a lot of good news from USDA for some assistance that's come out, and also SBA has brought out their loan forgiveness, so we got those to talk about. So a lot of great things I'm sure today. So Dave or Mike want to go first?
Let me grab the baton here real quick.
Right.
Couple of little news items. Yesterday, the state issued an executive order from the governor that came through the Marijuana Regulatory Agency, which provided very extensive guidelines on how, mostly focused on cannabis growers, how they can reopen. But at the same time, there's hemp retailers, and there's also obviously hemp growers. And so they would be applicable for them to read these guidelines. Talks about how you need to develop a COVID-19 response plan, that you need to have a supervisor in charge of that response plan on premises all the time, and various other safeguards to make sure that your workers or your people, your customers, don't get exposed to COVID-19 should you have it, not be aware of it. That seems to be a big issue right now, is you can have a 12-day or 14-day incubation period where you're very contagious and you don't even know you are. So that's the reason for the mask. But anyway, all that information is at my other website, MIMarijuanareport.com. It's a very long, 4 or 5 pages long. I would urge everybody to read that just to see if it applies to you. It might not, but just be on the safe side so that you don't get the state after you because you're not following the new rules. And I'll turn it back over to Dave, who's going to introduce our guest up there in Traverse City. And Dave's up in Traverse City as well, right, Dave?
Yeah, thank you, Mike. This feels really weird. First trip in a long time. Had to get up here and take care of some business, and want to have the opportunity to show off some of Mike Thue's cloning skills here. So we're going to do a little show and tell here, which is fun. It's always great when we can get the hemp plant, which is the star of the show and the thing. So Michael's with Great Lakes Hemp Supplements. They're one of the Cannabis Cup winners for CBD edibles. He's got some good things going on, and Mike's been a great member of IHemp Michigan, active, always willing to share and to answer questions. I know, like at our Birch Run meeting, we probably had him answering questions for a half an hour because there's just a lot of us that have a lot to learn yet. So Mike's been doing it for a while. So Mike, why don't you tell us what you have going on here?
All right. So brought in a few varieties for us to talk about today. The really focus is the propagation process. Right now I'm cleaning up my scissors with some alcohol. You
hold them up.
The cloning process is, very sensitive. It's the beginning of the plant. You can have clones die off for no reasons. You can have plants die for no reasons, even when you're transplanting them at times. So you really just have to be very gentle when you're working with the root system of the clones and doing the transplanting. So we also want to be very clean and sterile when you're cutting those clones also. It is similar to like cutting flowers. We try to cut clones underneath the water or underneath the gel when we're doing them. So if you have, your solution, for me, there's a lot of different opinions on how to, what to use in solutions with different grow techniques. Personally, because we do a lot of cannabis cultivation as well with the caregiver side, besides what we have going on with the hemp side. I have always had great success with the Clonex, the rooting gel. You can get organic rooting compounds also that work. So there's different options for what is considered a rooting hormone. And then in the water, I do usually go for about a 350 to 400 ppm. A lot of people vary depending on if you're going with like a straight cloner, what should be in it, or how you should soak your plugs. So we'll usually have plugs, the rapid rooter plugs or riot rooters, soaking in the water. Our nutrient water that I do use about the 400 ppm, I usually always add your CalMag first. Some of the liquid nutrients can have lock out each other if they have an interaction. So you always want to make sure to like rinse your measuring cups in between each like nutrient mix or each nutrient that you measure out. Besides the CalMag, I usually add a little bit of B1, some B vitamins, or some, geez, I should have brought that other bottle in here, like Rhizofield, Rhizotonic, what's Rhizofuel if it's in Psycho. Like there's a lot of, some different rhizome though to help with the root development.
How much of that, the CalMag, it's calcium and magnesium, right?
Yeah, and then there's always a small amount of nitrogen that accompanies that.
That make it. So how much of that do you put in the water?
So on a ratio, we do usually 60 mLs on a 6-gallon bucket. So 10 mLs of CalMag per gallon.
Okay.
On a smaller ratio, depending on, you know, where we're at with our followers. And I really enjoy teaching the small farmers, helping them to have a piece and a part of this industry. You know, we haven't developed enough seed stock to really be able to work with the large scale farmers, though we did have a good development of seeds this year. We have some of our F2, so our first back cross line of our Canatonic and our Boax cross. For our seeds that we've started, and then also compared to clones, which I really am a favor of the cloning aspect over planting seeds. You can just start off with a bigger plant. The difference that people talk about mostly is the taproot. With clones, the roots grow out from the stem. From the stem, they grow out and kind of around the pot. Where with seeds, you have a deeper initial taproot. So if you're in a really windy area, some people really look at that, you know, or consider the seeds instead of clones because of your taproot. But that wider root base of a clone, I believe, can be just as strong or developed, you know, if you have good, healthy plants, as, you know, that one deep taproot that has a bunch of offshoots. We're just dealing more with the offshoots when you're dealing with clones of the root system than that deep taproot. I was surprised last year I bought some, or 2 years ago, I bought some 100-gallon pots and they were only like 18 inches tall. I'm like, where's the root gonna go? Like,
Yeah.
in 100 gallons, really, like 18 inches, that's it? But its clones grow out, and I didn't use them. To me, it didn't feel sufficient enough. And the roots are growing out of it and into the ground underneath it. So, you know, in pots of that kind, those fabric pots. So that is a benefit to using the cloth or fabric pots, is you can plant them and not transplant them. The roots will grow and stretch out of that pot and, you know, and go into the soil also. I know some people in plastic pots, they'll just cut off the bottom of the plastic pot and bury that and let it grow on the smaller scale. But so that's, you know, that's kind of the big discussion when you come to the difference in seeds and clones, you know, is the difference in taproot. So I'm a fan of the clones. And another reason, if you want to talk about the differences in genetics, you know, with a clone, you always are guaranteed that identical genetic. When you have a seed, you can have a whole batch of seeds and you can have random spikes of THC that appear sometimes in seeds. And it's a recessive gene because these are all bred from THC genetics. And we're just years of trying to find just high CBD strains and keep breeding those out. But there are still, every one of these cannabis plants still has those recessive genes in them. Another reason people are looking at CBG, because CBG plants, there is no THC that's being developed, or very, very little. I actually just got some lab reports that the Spot Labs in Kalamazoo called me yesterday to talk about some seed samples that I had sent down there, and then also the CBG plants I had sent down there. And they thought I sent them vegetative seed plants, you know, for the CBG clones. And I'm like, well, would you believe that was pulled at week 8? And he's like, week 8 of veg? I'm like, no, week 8 of flower, as we tested them indoors throughout the season. So we do have our tested and approved now CBG genetics that we are able to work with. It's limited this year, but it's definitely for next year. We will have, you know, a lot more of that available for the growers. You know, on a small scale, we might be able to get people some, so that way they can develop and do their own moms throughout the season for next year. But the CBG clones are kind of limited this year. But the seeds, back to the seeds, you know, is one reason I don't trust CBG seeds, and it's taken me a long time to get on board with some of the CBD seeds, again, is because of that recessive gene. I've been researching and breeding and growing CBD genetics now for almost 10 years. I've been pulling seeds from all over the country trying to find different CBD ratios. Every seed, even out of the same plant, can have a different ratio. So it's something you got to really be careful with, like knowing your genetics. You know, we had a number of farmers last year that bought seeds out of Oregon and some other states that believed they were getting hemp seeds. Well, these fields came up 8% THC and 12% CBD. Like, I've been making 1-to-1 ratios for a long time, and even a good 1-to-1 ratio is hard to find because the ratio of CBD to THC changes within every seed. Seeds that I did for the cannabis side to have I was looking for a 4-to-1, 3-to-1 type of a ratio. So we did a VCDC cross with our cannatonic. The one I grew out looking for, I grew 2 of them out, kept 2 phenos. They both tested about 3% THC. I gave some of those same seeds to friends of mine that do hemp and cannabis cultivation. They found a seed that stayed under 0.3% THC, and they're able to clone that now and plant that as hemp this year. Cool. This same plant, the same seed stock, gave a 0.3% seed and a 3% seed. So there's always some variance in genetics, you know. So if you're doing large scale ag, you know, you really don't have a lot of option but to plant a lot of seeds. But just know, like, seeds, there's still a lot of flaws in them. It's really hard to stabilize these genetics. And again, I've been doing it for 10 years, and we still have anomalies that pop up that show their head that shouldn't happen. And we have to individually test every plant before we use the seeds of that plant and test for multiple generations to establish seeds that we feel safe enough that we can sell to the farmer without putting them or ourselves at risk. For a small company like mine, you know, if I had one farmer's field go hot and I had to cover that or keep my word to that farmer and make it right, that would do significant damage to me as a business owner. So we have to take extra assurance to make sure that every step of the way we are giving the best and highest quality we can, because I really am a man of my word, and I keep it and make sure my farmers get what they, you know, signed up for.
The environment and the weather has a lot to do with that too, though, doesn't it? The stresses? The
stresses of the environment can, as well as your nitrogen, your fertilizer situation. You know, you don't want any late releasing nitrogen that can cause THC spikes or try to cause vegetative growth late in the season when it's supposed to be flowering. Those kind of stresses can add into your THC count. You also need to limit nutrients in the PK range. You know, calcium and nitrogen are really, you know, about the extent of what most of these plants need. If you add high levels of PK, potassium, phosphates, potash in your flowering stage, or have high levels of that left in your soil, those will also attribute to spikes in your THC later in the season and crop. Okay. So knowing your soil, knowing your field, because our window is so small. You know, when you talk about 0.3% is all we're allowed to have, most of their tests have a higher variance that is allowed in their testing than what we're even allowed to test at. So you really, our genetics have to be dialed in very well and specific. So it's another reason I really encourage working your own clones and mothers throughout the winter, preparing your own fields. You save on input costs, you know, and you can continue to take a mother plant and butcher it throughout the season multiple times over and over again throughout the winter, to establish multiple mothers, you know, for yourself come spring.
So how's this work?
So
Let's see some action.
cleaning utensils and then razor blades, always cleaning or using new ones. I use new and clean. See if I can get this open without cutting myself.
No blood.
Also, it's always a good idea, you know, to wear gloves. It's just, you don't want any extra contamination into that root zone. Now we're definitely in the era of PPE. I probably should have my mask on sitting this close to Dave, but you
Just
know,
don't give him a hug or anything. You
I
know?
won't sneeze in his face or cough on him.
No.
We'll have to get you one of those really cool hemp masks.
Well, you know, I have a lot of masks in the building. I am a certified medical assistant, so this is a clinic as well up front right now. We're in the back half of the building, but I have asthma and I'm just really not a fan of the masks. So I only wear them when I absolutely have to. And Dave said I didn't have to, so said it was up to me.
We'll play nice.
I won't sneeze on them.
Yep.
So the cloning gel, I always plate, some kind of good surface that you can cut on.
Here, hold, tilt that up so you can see. Yeah, it's kind of that is a gel.
Yeah,
Okay.
it's just a gel, a rooting hormone.
All right.
When we post this, Michael, maybe you can provide the ingredient list. You know what, all the various things you're going to be talking about, what people need to buy by the brand or the bottle or whatever.
Yeah. So some of these are pre-cut for me, so that way we didn't have to take a bunch of time today. But what I usually do.
Here, let me hold that. Let me Ivana.
Bring that over here. So you want to look for, you know, the lower limbs that have a few nodes. You want at least 2 or 3 good nodes after you cut it. So snipping it off the plant, getting it in the water. And then like I said earlier, like flowers, we'll try to cut it underneath the water on a 45-degree angle. So that way there's no air bubbles that can get up into that plant that could cause that clone to have problems later on in its life cycle. And then just dipping the end of it in the rooting hormone, right? Then we always cut our leaves in half. The reason for that is you want the energy to be focused on developing roots, not trying to keep leaves alive on the plant. So we chop them down in half. You got a little clone. And then our plugs, I kind of squeeze about half the water out. You don't want it to get like light brown where it's drying out, but you want it to be dark in color and make sure it's good and moist. I also don't use the hole that's already pre-made. That's halfway through the plug at times. And by the time you get to the bottom of that to get the clone to actually stick in place, there's very little room for the roots to develop. And a lot of times you end up just going all the way through the plug. So I always have them make a new hole with the plug. I usually say if your stem's not strong enough to make a new hole, you probably don't want to use that clone and get one that's a little bit bigger.
Okay.
Right? If you have to take very small clones that are a little bit weaker, you can. You just might have to take a toothpick or something and poke a hole in that plug and make like a really shallow new hole that started to get in those plugs. So we go from the plug to the trays.
Michael, before you get off the plug, I've also seen machines where they have, it's like, used dirt. You just put the cutting into a machine that sprays water on them. Pros and cons of those two machines, of like what you're doing versus that other cloner?
So you said the Aero cloner or Easy cloners that just kind of sprays water.
Mm-hmm.
So those are really good for home personal use. It's very quick root development. I've got a number of those upstairs as well. The difference is because I need to sell trays of clones for the farm, or space wise, getting large volume of plants ready, you'll take up a lot of space with the Easy cloners. They are good. It's low maintenance versus having to spray these every day, a couple times a day. When you're in the humidity domes, you really have to keep them moist and keep these. So you're spraying the inside of this dome at least 3-4 times a day, keeping a very high humidity until some roots begin to develop. Once the roots begin to develop, the humidity can go down a little bit. You can then crack the lids. But until there's root development, you do want your lids closed on your humidity domes, and you want that humidity as high as possible until that root development happens.
So, question. So you're not watering the plants themselves, you're spraying water in the top of the dome?
You do both.
Oh.
So this is 4 times a day to keep the humidity up. You might only water once a day or once every other day until the roots are developed.
Okay.
Once roots are developed, we'll usually water these trays every day. They start drying out. And then we aren't worried about this dome being as moist because these are rooted.
Okay.
Dave asked earlier about the yellowing of the leaves. So if you look, we got one yellow leaf here, kind of the bottom one on the side. It's one of the ones that's been cut in half. So that's the plant using the nutrients that are available to begin to do some of the root development. And again, the energy that's being taken away from growing this leaf and keeping that alive and focusing on getting a root there. That one's just a small one, but she's coming.
Okay. Potential. Lots of potential here.
Yeah, I mean, I don't ever count 100% success rate with cloning, but you may get roots, but it might be something that, is just not as developed as some of the other ones. But, so I'll usually take the ones that are slower in developing,
Look at that.
and I'll usually toss them compared to some of the ones that, have a little bit more going on. Actually, this one's not bad. There's a number of root spots, so we would still keep it. I'm gonna guess this one didn't root. If the plug don't come with it, the roots aren't strong enough that I want to keep it. Right. So that one, is again, not 100% success, but very good success rate with these domes and what we're able to do with them. And then again, from there, that tray, let's see, these were cut. Well, that one's not labeled. These were cut. I think right at the end of last month, so, a small clone, once rooted, within a week or two, can develop into a good sized plant that has some strength and hardiness to being able to harden it off outside and plant it. You have a better success rate by, getting a clone with a good root system established versus seeds too. Seed germination rate with direct planting in the field, a lot of times you're really only looking at like 60 to 70% germination rate if you directly plant seeds. Seed depth is a big thing with that. You don't ever want to go more than a 1/2 inch deep. So between 1/4 to a 1/2 inch deep, or like the first knuckle of your finger when you're talking about the depth of seed planting. Soil temperature, I believe, as low as 46 degrees. You can start actually germinating seeds in the field. In Michigan, the plastic is a big help for being able to raise the temperature of the soil in the areas in which you're going to be planting.
When you clone, what size do you wait before you take it outside?
So these are large enough now to go outside and be hardied off. I'd probably leave it outside for a week if you can, depending on the size of your grow, depends on. In Michigan, we get a really small window. We go from winter to summer
Yeah.
very quickly.
Mhm.
And you don't get a whole lot of a spring planting season. So again, the weather is a big determining factor on when you're going to be able to get your plants in the ground. But this is definitely sufficient enough to put into the ground and be pretty confident in its development.
Michael, let me ask you a question. For the beginning hemp farmer, is there an optimal size, like an acre or 2 or 3 or 5 or whatever, that you would recommend until they really understand the process?
So I can say from experience, because last year was a learning year for all of us, even though I've been working with these genetics for a long time, we're learning to upscale. We're learning how to do this on a larger volume so we can help more farmers or bring in larger farms.
How much size? 1 acre?
Is there a
So 1 acre, is manageable for 1 to 3 people, trying to do it themselves. Like start with the small area that you can really keep an eye on and maintain. I did 1 acre last year. I had a friend of mine, my best friend that I grew up with. We did 3 acres at his farm, and his brother was trying to maintain it by himself. Where me, I did 1 acre. I had 2 helpers, and I produced 6 times at least what they did off of 3 acres in 1 acre. So being able to have time and attention and develop one area really, really well can be a better outcome than having a very large area that you can't keep up on all of it or have trouble with. You can make just as much of a return focusing in on 1 small acre versus even 20 acres if you don't have the manpower and the labor to be able to do to keep up with this crop. It is labor intensive. You got to clean them. You got to be picking leaves. You got to be going through and looking for males. You have to be out there with these plants. So it is, again, better to do a smaller area that you can focus in on than trying to overdo it. And that was something I tried to make sure I didn't do last year.
Yeah.
And even then I got an area up by my road that I kind of gave up on and just said, what's this going to do if we don't water it compared to what happens with our area that we really focused on? And you're talking like 1.5 feet to a 2 foot plant versus 6 foot plant. And, there's a big difference if you're just counting on Mother Nature to water your field for you all summer, or if you're laying drip and irrigation and really dialing in an area that you can keep an eye on.
What about, with clones, you don't have to worry so much about male plants, right? But you have hermaphrodites. So is that still an August thing where you have to start looking for those plants flipping?
If you buy from a trusted source, you shouldn't have to deal with any hermaphrodites from a clone. It's normally more of a seed trait, especially in feminized seeds.
Okay.
There's a higher ratio of hermaphrodites usually because you're back crossing or making an inbred strain to try to save that genetic. So it's unfortunate, I guess I probably don't want to go there, but inbreeding is not the best practice.
Okay.
And therefore you have more of the hermaphroditic traits that will show up. Clones, if you come from a trusted source, you know that they're stable female plants and you should never have to worry about a hermaphrodite unless you have some very extreme stressful environments. And then it's just going to be a couple. It's not going to be something that's going to seed your whole field.
Now, I have another question. So here's the mother plant, right? It's about, what, 2.5 feet tall. At what point do is the mother plant done, or can you take clones off of a mature plant? At what point can you not take a clone off a plant?
Once it's past 10 days in the flowering cycle, it's not suggested to take any more clones because it's already it's converting to the flowering cycle, right? But in that first week of conversion is probably the optimal time to take your clones, because during that conversion, it's spitting out some of the last rooting hormones. After the first like week or two in the flower, the roots don't develop anymore. You got what you got for roots, and you need to just make sure that it has what it needs for its root zone.
So how do you know the difference between veg state and flower state?
Well, for us, if you're outdoors, it's mid-August. You start your flower cycle. It's when the sun has less than 12 hours of daylight left. That starts our flower cycle. The plant outside, about 14 hours of light will begin its conversion. From the 14 to 12 will kind of be its conversion. After that, it's in bloom.
What do you see on the plant? Do you see those little nubs start showing up?
There'll be more hairs. So
more
like
hairs.
Where you see hairs coming out to identify the pistils that show that it's a female plant. I believe that's the right word.
Pistils, okay.
Yeah.
Is that a pistil there?
It's the top of these nodes,
okay.
the new growth nodes.
You might want to show us on camera.
Yeah.
So
see if you can get that.
Set it right there. You can set it down. So each one of these could be considered a clone. These couple nodes that are off the branch here, right? And in that growth node, you can see those little white hairs. So that's your identifying marker.
Can you guys see that?
Probably not.
How well do you see that? I can bring that.
Probably not that far away, but so you can kind of see the little white hairs coming off the bottom. As you begin to flower, you'll see more hairs coming out, and then that's where your buds are developing. They'll fill in. The bud will fill in around the hair. Okay. And have the formation of the actual flower of the plant.
Cool. Okay. Oops.
So again, you want to have all your clones cut though off your plants. If you're going to try to save some for through the winter to make your own mothers, clone your plants by middle of August. Get some clones started off your outdoor plants, so that way you've got some others. Make sure you've identified by then the females and the males before you do any cloning. So between whether or not they have a pollen sac or the white hair of the pistil, that's the female versus the pollen sac of the male. Where you would normally see the white hair of the pistil in the formation of the flower is also the bottom of that node is where you'll see the sac develop. So it's a lot of times if you're not seeing the hairs on a late plant, it will be a male. It just needs a week in the flower cycle or under that season to show that it's going to be a male. You should be able to identify your females before your males earlier on in the season, because again, at 2 feet tall, 3 feet tall, we can clearly see the white hairs to identify it as a female versus not having to wait till end of August to find the males. So identifying your females earlier in the season can also help you to identify what plants have a more likely potential to be a male in the middle of or end of August.
Yeah, because you can walk by that plant and the next day it's like, oh, hey, buddy.
Yeah, not see it. I mean, it literally can happen overnight. Yep.
All right. Do we have any questions out there? I know we have a number of participants. Do they have questions? If so, put them in the chat box.
Yep. Are we hearing Blaine? Blaine, are you watching the chat?
Yep, I am.
Okay, cool. All right. Good deal.
I know we do have one ask, is somewhat related. Shannon O'Hara is looking for textile materials so she can make knapsacks and masks and things like that. Could we bring Shannon in real quickly to do her ask?
Yeah, that'd be great.
Bring you into the
There she is. Calling in from New York City.
other topic. So it's a little
Okay.
merger.
Yeah.
Hi, I'm Shannon. I'm with Skilled Laborers Brigade, and one of my co-founders is also on the call, Rachel Kibbe. And we are specifically, we've been looking to source some hemp fabric that we could use to make PPEs, and we've been really struggling with that. And we were wondering, we would prefer to find somebody within our hemisphere that we could get fabric from, but we are also open to international. And I was just wondering if anybody had any great sources for large amounts of fabric.
Working on it. Blaine, this would be a good segue to talk about our hemp masks and the fabric. There's some fabric being manufactured out in California. It's being stitched up in the Carolinas.
Yeah. And Shannon, we'll see if we can't maybe hook you up with that person and see if that can help you out there. And if anybody else knows of anything else, please put it in the chat or let them know.
I really appreciate it. Thank you. I mean, we need to buy a lot of it. So
Shannon, can you see the chat?
Click on your chat button,
Yeah.
Shannon.
Okay, I'll write it in right now. Thank you.
Because I see Adam Dietrich put a note on there. How do we reach you, Shannon? They have a few connections. So
Yeah, we were chatting about this before we started, Shannon, and they mentioned that they had sources in both California and North Carolina. So I don't know if that's the same that's coming up on the chat box or not.
I think Adam probably just got your information there, so you guys can talk. And Adam, I might give you a call too afterwards, so we can.
Blaine, could you talk about our hemp mask project?
So our hemp mask we've got going on. Dave, could you bring up a picture of it all? I tried to with mine, but I can't.
I was hoping Brad was going to be on with live show and tell.
I don't see Brad on. He may be getting them to MDARS, or he might be doing the demo. So anyways, so we've been working on this behind the scenes to get these hemp masks for MDART, so that their first front line or their first responders kind of thing, because they got to go out and do a lot of inspections in stores and farms, and before somebody ships some products out, they've got to do international things. So we've been able to work with this company, and we've got these masks now, and they're kind of very cool. We thought, there we go.
Oh, there we go. Yeah.
That's as good as it gets today, guys. Sorry.
Show that again, Dave.
Here, I'm gonna do the, I have another picture. So these,
All right.
this is, he used
There we go. That's the one I was trying to show. Yep.
indigo hemp ink is the blue, indigo blue, made from hemp seed oil.
So the dye is actually made from,
Yeah,
the
sorry.
dye with is actually from that. So
Mhm.
now we're working these out, and so we've got a great campaign going to help cover the cost of these. So if you go on to the IHemp Hour event over there, you can find it. We're going to get it on the main page as well. But for a $50 donation, you're going to get a mask, and then for $75 donation, you're going to get a mask and a very cool T-shirt with a very cool design we have, and it's going to be a hemp T-shirt as well.
Yeah,
So,
and that'll pay for donating the masks to MDARD. So we're donating 200 masks.
And we're working on trying to have them available for sale, but we've got to do a few more things to get that going. We have these right now. Brad is working with MDART to get the masks physically to them. There's a process we have to go through to make sure they get to MDART, not just to the general kind of receiving that they have there. So we're working on that. We're really proud that we've been able to do that and be able to make that happen for them. They're really comfortable masks, and I think they're reusable. So that's the great thing about them. They are antivirus somewhat, just because of the nature of hemp.
Antibacterial.
Attached to it. So
Antivirus.
yeah. So go onto the website. Again, under IHemp Hour, we'll get a button on the front of the page as soon as Dave gets back home. But that all just kind of came together this week, and we finally received the shipment on it. So yeah.
I see we have a question, Blaine.
Okay, let's see. Here we go. When you clone, is the new plant at the exact stage as the mother? So, for example, if you clone a plant that is several months old and getting ready to flower, is your clone at the same stage?
So as long as it's not flowering, your clone will stay in a vegetative state. It's just a smaller version of that same plant in the vegetative state. You can clone at the end of harvest or before you harvest your plant. It's called re-veg. All right. So in the cannabis industry, if you find a strain that you say you forgot to clone it, it's like week 7 and you're like, oh my gosh, like, I do not want to lose this strain. You can clone that. You can get it to take roots. It might not do anything though for 2 months. As long as it had been in flower, it needs at least that amount of time to convert itself back to veg. And then every one of the little hairs of the bud will turn into a branch. And it's called re-vegging. So if you clone late into flower, say week 4 into flower, you can still clone it and it'll root. You might not get any new growth though for a few weeks, but it will come as long as there's a root. As long as it rooted, it'll eventually turn into a plant again.
So
It just has to be under 18-hour light, again, in veg, instead of the 12-hour light. And then again, for the same amount of time that it was in flower, it'll take that amount of time at least before you'll see any new growth. So if you cut week 4 of flower and decided you didn't clone it and you want it, it's going to take 4 weeks before you see any new growth, even though you develop a root.
and really, you're doing all your cloning under artificial light. You don't do the cloning outside, right?
Yeah, I don't have any real experience with just cloning and leaving them in the greenhouse. I believe even most greenhouses, when you're cloning, because early in the season, are all supplemental lighting. So just T5 fluorescents or some good LEDs. Honestly, upstairs, I have a bunch of $25 Honeywell LED shop lights. And once they got roots on them, they can move over there. I do prefer the fluorescents for like the first 2 days at least. The fluorescents seem to be more intense than the LEDs, but you can root with, supplemental lighting and with low supplemental lighting. It doesn't have to be extremely intense, but the more the light, the better.
So if I identify a plant, it's before flower stage, and I want to clone that for next year, what's that process look like to keep that plant going and to have mothers for the next year?
So again, you start with your clone plug. You take a couple months to developing and growing out the plant. Again, indoor cultivation, I have just with CalMag, I use General Hydroponics. I believe it is. It has the highest ratio of nitrogen. Calcium deficiencies are one of the biggest problems with growing. So I like that it has a very high number of CalMag as well as some good nitrogen, because I don't need anything else. You can water with just that CalMag and it has enough nitrogen to keep your plants flourishing without going into a bunch of different nutrients when it comes to hemp. So these are pretty much fed just CalMag. That's it. Every once in a while, I might give them a boost, a pickup, but that's it. It's just a good, strong calcium magnesium mix. Same thing for our fields. Is the only thing I put down this year was a low CalMag, the chicken manure of a 432. Really just focusing on the nitrogen and the calcium side for the field amendment before we planted until this year.
So, but getting back to
so like how long?
Yeah, and then so you're gonna have to keep it in the winter, keep it going in the winter under artificial light.
Yeah,
right?
so you'll have to keep a T5, going throughout the winter, a few of them to keep some moms that you can clone off of. But actually, I can give you the dates because I keep track on all of my tags. So this was cloned on January 8th. This was rooted and transplanted on January 30th. So they were a little slack in there because normally 10 to 14 days, especially in the spring, we can see roots in as little as 5 days because the environment is prime, the earth and the energy is all about, you know, it's time to grow and roots come a lot faster. If you're trying to clone in the middle of winter to save your plants, it might take a full 2 weeks, maybe even 3 to get a good root development to where you transplant. It's that difference in season. The time the earth is telling itself it's time to go dormant, and it's taking you longer even indoors to see that same root development compared to the spring. So once planted on the 30th, then it stayed in a 6-inch pot until 4/6. So you've got 2 months in about a 6-inch pot. And then on 4/6, we went into this. No, on 4/24, we went into this.
And will you leave it in that plant then? Will you leave it in that pot, or will you transfer it one more time?
So it depends on the size of your room. I've got a lot of moms upstairs in either 10 gallons and 15-gallon pots that are about 6 foot tall because of the number of clones. So it just depends on how much you're trying to produce for your field. You know, the bigger the plant, the more cloning sites that you have available to be able to do more clones. You know, and then the smaller nodal space that you can get to clone and take roots, also you can get more clones. So, you know, you can see on the tip, like we were looking at earlier, on these tips, in the first inch, you've got 2 nodes. So technically, you could cut it off at this 3rd node.
Bend it down just a little bit farther, Mike.
Yeah, you're a little high there.
Sorry, Owen. So in this first, well, I just broke that one.
Uh-oh.
So we'll just take that one off.
Yeah,
And there we go, got a clone.
All right, we got a clone. So in that first 3 inches, you could honestly get 2 clones out of there if you cut this off right here under the water to make sure there's no air bubbles. Then you could have 2 separate nodes in less than that, in that 2 inches. You know, you only need truly 1 growth node to take root, but you got to have enough stem in that plug to be able to stay wet and in the rooting hormone. So it doesn't always have to be, you know, 3 inches. You can get a couple out of a small plant. So it just depends on your space and the size of your operation.
okay, very cool.
All right, any other questions for Mike right now? Well, Mike, I want to thank you very much for that. And we'll see if anybody puts anything in the chat. And Shannon, thank you for yours coming on, and we'll try to get you some. And Adam, thanks for sharing. You know, that's what this is all about, sharing this information around. Because if somebody doesn't know somebody, somebody else does. So that's the whole idea of this thing. So I'll kind of wrap up the show a little bit. Okay, so Nancy's got a question. Do I understand correctly that the cut end of the clone is not through the plug?
That's correct. Yes.
Well, no, the cut end. So if you were to cut this off underwater on a 45, right, then this end, this cut end gets dipped in the rooting gel and then placed into the plug. The cut end does go into the plug.
But not all the way through.
But you don't want it to, yeah, you only want it in the plug like a 1/4 of an inch, like we're talking about seed depth. So you can also use these plugs to plant seeds too, because that hole is already there. You can plant a seed in, cover it back up, right, by just kind of closing the hole in around it. And you can use these for seed start plugs as well.
Now, do you make your plugs, Michael, or do you buy your plugs?
I do buy those. You can just do Pro Mix, right? If you want to do your own plugs and not buy them, you can buy the 72 site, like the trays, right? And you can fill them with Pro Mix and water them in, so that way it kind of packs itself in there. And then you can do the same thing, take the clone, dip it in the gel, and you can stick it right in that Pro Mix also, instead of buying a bunch of pucks. For me, having the team help me in doing it, this is a little bit easier to do. It's less messy. But if you're trying to save money and do a large scale at home, you can fill these in, and then as the roots develop, when you pull it out, it'll hold all that little ball of pro mix together from the root development, and then you can transplant that as well and not have to spend your money on the plugs. The pro mix bale will go a lot farther on your money cost wise than buying a bunch of plugs. So I buy them in bulk so I don't get too bad of a deal. But
Yeah. Then what are you actually growing once you plant that clone? If you're growing on a smaller scale, are you're just amending the soil, or do you have a secret sauce?
so we do, for our indoor and our clone starts, we do still use the Pro Mix, but it has no nutrients in it. So when you're looking at the Pro Mix, there's also a number of different kinds. I prefer the Pro Mix CC that has more of a cocoa ratio. I like the aeration that comes from the cocoa as well as the saturation. Cocoa, even when it's dry, is still moist. And that's kind of a catch-22, but there's still a little bit of water content even when it's light and feels dry. So it gives you a little bit more sensitive area there with around the root zone to make sure that that plant never truly dries out. It does cause fungus gnat problems with a lot of cocoa grows, but we try to make sure that things get time to sufficiently dry before they're watered. Overwatering can definitely be a problem and can kill your plants. It can cause them to wilt and look sick. So you want sufficient drying time before you water again.
All right. Excellent.
Any concluding remarks, Michael, that you want to leave people with?
No, I thank you guys for asking me to help you with this presentation today. You know, it's something that we are on full bore right now. I've sold way a lot more clones this year than I did last year. Been trying to get extra help in here for us to keep up on our orders. So I love being able to help share the information, teach a small, you know, the everybody that's willing and wants to learn, able to learn. Let's, you know, again, that's why I took the CBD focus 10 years ago and have been giving these plants away and teaching people how to cultivate their own food and medicine.
Oh, looks like we had one more question come in. Wayne?
Nancy brought another up again. Can you grow out the 72s straight to the field, or do they need to be transplanted in between?
In the field?
Yeah,
So
so
once
these
it's
72s.
So you take it right out of that tray and put it right in the field?
So I would say that you can definitely, all right, we do that. So you can go directly from the tray to the field. The thing is you want to harden that plant off a little bit before you plant it. So set the trays outside for a couple days if you can, like during the day, and then bring them back in and let them get used to that sunlight, because it can be a lot more intense than what we're used to indoors. And sometimes it can be a lot. So it's called acclimating the plants to their climate. Just like you might acclimate a fish to a new fish tank. We're doing the same thing with these plants. So get them outside, get them some sun, bring them back into your fluorescence if you can do that. Or the greenhouses. If you have a greenhouse, then they're getting hardened off and they're getting used to the sun in that greenhouse. You can go directly from the greenhouse in the trays and go outside.
All right, thanks.
Excellent.
All right, so we'll move on and kind of wrap up the show. We're almost to our hour. So as promised, I always try to have a nice little recipe. So I'm going to show this. Slide off the plate. You can see that. So this is a hemp, and I used Parmesan cheese last night, crusted salmon. It is a really simple recipe.
I didn't eat lunch yet.
Easy to do the whole time, prep time and cook time. You're looking at 20 minutes total. So not there. So the ingredients for this, and we'll have it up on the website as well, but your salmon fillets, whatever size you want, half cup grated cheese, Parmesan cheese, a half a cup of hemp hearts, which is what I use, a teaspoon of dried basil, a teaspoon of dried parsley, 2 to 3 teaspoons of olive oil. I use a little more than that. I also put the olive oil pretty much on the fish so that that mixture stays right on there when I put it into the grill. A tablespoon of lemon juice, lemon slices for when you serve it, sea salt and pepper for servings. I also like a lemon pepper salt as well too that I use. and I did it on the grill. And again, the whole thing's 20 minutes from start to finish and ready to eat. So a great recipe for this weekend to use out while we're all outdoors enjoying this nice Memorial weekend coming up. A couple things else I want to talk about is some assistance that's come out from USDA. The good news is the assistance come out. The bad news is it's not available for hemp or tobacco products. But for farming, regular farms, for dairy, for livestock, specialty crops as well. The name of this is called the Coronavirus Food Assistance Program, CFAP. It's going to provide up to $16 billion in direct payments to deliver relief to American farmers and ranchers impacted by the coronavirus pandemic. In addition to this direct support to farmers and ranchers, USDA is also going to donate money to the Family's Food Box. $3 billion of that is going to that. They're going to buy produce, dairy, meat, and be able to put those into boxes for families that need assistance with food. It begins May 26th. You can actually go to the USDA website now, and there's information there. And but the application itself won't be available until next Tuesday. And right now, the offices are closed. Pretty much, you have to go in there. You have to make a phone call ahead of time. A lot of this we'll be able to do online. If you have not already certified with the office and not already a current farmer with them, there's some steps you have to do. There's some information you have to provide them so that they can register the farm, register you, make sure that you're actively engaged in farming, and you're not making over $900,000 a year. That fits most of us, so I think we're okay there.
Yeah.
The eligibility, there's $250,000 per person per entity. It's a little different here because now for corporations and limited liability companies, you could qualify for more than $250,000. Usually you can't under those programs, but this one you can. And again, you contact the office if you need to, but also you can go online. If you have other questions, you can always contact me. I'll put my contact information in the chat here in just a minute. If you have other questions on that, we'd be glad to help out. Again, just a little more assistance coming out to help out farmers. And what this is for the loss of, if they've had more than a 5% loss in their income, not income, but for the commodity price from January through April. So again, just a few things there, but something available as well. Also this week, the Small Business Association came out with their loan forgiveness application. So if you got one of these loans, it's your responsibility as the borrower to complete this form and get it into your lending institution so they can do the loan forgiveness for it. So SBA, you can check on that. Again, we'll have it on our website here. It's an 11-page form. Most of it is how to fill out or definitions. The actual application part isn't that long, but that does need to be completed. You have a while to get that in. I believe it's July something. The date anyways, but there are some things that make it a little difficult because for farmers, just because of what they're looking for. So if you had an accountant or a bookkeeper help you make the application out, certainly get their assistance. Again, it won't be very much for them to be able to provide that, or talk to your lender about it, and they'll be able to help you fill that out to get that completed. So what else have I got? Again, we want to mention about the mask. We could sure use some help on this to get this paid for, to help the MDART. I'm glad that we were able to provide this assistance, and I think they're going to really like those masks. They're very comfortable to wear, especially as long as they're going to be wearing them when they're outdoors doing their work on that. Mike, you listed a website that you have that some of that information on the opening back up is. Can you give that website again?
Sure. It's MIMarijuanareport.com. There's a story in there that you click on the link. It'll take you to the PDF that the state issued yesterday. Very long PDF, but it's primarily focused on cannabis growers, but it also has some issues for if you're a distributor or seller or retailer, like I know Michael is. He might want to take a look at it just to make sure. And of course, there's the farming element. All that's listed in there about what you have to do to bring your business back up as we slowly move out of lockdown, thank God, right? And so all that information is there at MIMarijuanareport.com.
All right, thanks, Mike. And our thoughts and prayers go out to everybody's had that recent flooding over in Midland, and have some friends over there that I talked to yesterday, and they've had to move out for a while, but luckily their house was not affected in the end of that. But certainly that's going to be a big mess over there for those people. So
These farmers not planting in that region again this year, huh?
Yeah, that's
2 years back to back. That's a good bad loss for a farmer.
Yeah.
and then those folks out there that have access to hemp textiles, I can still see Shannon there at the top of the box. So reach out to her. She's looking to buy as much as she can to make them into knapsacks and masks and various other things, right, Shannon? Just nod there. You don't turn it. There we go. Okay. And her contact information is in the chat box.
So I want to thank everybody. Certainly we appreciate everybody on, and we hope we're bringing some good content to you. Next week we got a very special guest, Jonathan Miller. He's with Anderson Todd, the attorney firm that does the U.S. Hemp Roundtable. They have done a tremendous amount of work to get this so that we can all plant and we can all do this and be able to move this hemp industry forward. And so it'll be a great show with him next week.